Everyone thought he was just a poor old man. They threw him out of the restaurant without knowing the secret he was hiding. The next morning, the entire world discovered who he really was.
The rain was falling heavily that night. The streets were almost empty. The city lights reflected on the wet roads. And inside one of the most luxurious restaurants in town, people were enjoying an expensive dinner. The restaurant was known as a place where wealthy businessmen, celebrities, and important guests came to celebrate special moments. But outside those golden doors, a man stood quietly in the rain. His name was Arthur Bennett. He was 78 years old. His silver hair was messy from the rain. His old brown coat had faded with time, and he held a simple wooden cane in his hand. To most people passing by, he looked like someone who had been forgotten by the world. But they didn't know his story. They didn't know the years he had spent helping others. They didn't know the lives he had changed. All they saw was an old man standing at the entrance of an expensive restaurant. Arthur looked through the glass doors. Inside, people were laughing. Families were celebrating. The smell of warm food filled the air. He gently touched his empty stomach. He hadn't eaten properly in 2 days. But he wasn't there to ask for charity. He reached into his pocket and carefully counted the few coins he had saved. "I think this should be enough for a simple soup," he whispered. With a small smile, Arthur opened the restaurant door. The warm air touched his cold face. For a moment, he felt hopeful. But before he could take another step, a young waiter walked toward him. "Excuse me, sir." Arthur looked up. "Yes, young man." The waiter glanced at his clothes and then looked around nervously. "I'm sorry, but this restaurant is quite busy tonight." Arthur smiled politely. "I understand. I only need a small meal. I have money." He opened his hand and showed the coins. The waiter's expression changed, not because of the amount, because of what he thought those coins represented. "I'm sorry, sir." Before he could finish, the restaurant manager appeared. His name was Richard Collins. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit and carried himself with confidence. He looked at Arthur for only a few seconds. Then he looked away. "Is there a problem?" The waiter quietly explained. "This gentleman wants a table." Richard looked at Arthur. "A table?" Arthur nodded. "Just something simple. Maybe soup and bread." The manager sighed. "Sir, this restaurant has certain standards." Arthur's face became confused. "I can pay." Richard glanced at the expensive dining room behind him. "That is not the point." A few customers began watching. Some whispered. Some stared. A businessman sitting near the window laughed quietly. Maybe he walked into the wrong place. A woman at another table looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Arthur heard them, but he remained calm. "I apologize if I caused any inconvenience." He slowly turned around, but Richard stopped him. "Sir, it will be better if you left." The words were simple, but they hurt. Arthur stood there silently. Rainwater dripped from his coat onto the shiny floor. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then someone took out a phone. A young man sitting near the entrance began recording. His name was Ethan Cole. Unlike everyone else, Ethan wasn't recording to make fun of Arthur. Something about the old man's expression caught his attention. Arthur wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't blaming anyone. He just looked disappointed, like he had expected more from people. Arthur quietly walked back outside. The door closed behind him, and the restaurant returned to normal. Or at least, everyone thought it did. Arthur walked through the rainy streets with his cane slowly touching the ground. He didn't complain. He didn't insult the restaurant. He simply continued walking. A few minutes later, he reached a small park nearby. The park was almost empty. Arthur sat on an old wooden bench. He opened his small cloth bag. Inside was a notebook, a few old photographs, and a piece of bread. He looked at the bread. His stomach told him to eat it. But then he noticed a small dog sitting nearby. The dog looked hungry and tired. Arthur smiled. "You look like you need this more than I do." He broke the bread in half and gave it to the dog. From a distance, Ethan watched. He couldn't understand what he was seeing. A man who had just been humiliated was still choosing kindness. Ethan lowered his camera. "Who are you?" he whispered. The next morning, Ethan reviewed the footage. At first, he only watched the restaurant scene. The old man being rejected. The manager pushing him away. The customers watching silently. But then he watched the park scene. The moment Arthur gave away his last piece of bread, something changed. Ethan realized this wasn't just a video. It was a story. a story about a person the world had ignored. He decided to find out who Arthur Bennett really was. He started searching, and what he discovered shocked him. Because the old man, everyone judged by his appearance, had once been one of the most respected people in the entire city, and his forgotten past was about to be revealed. Ethan sat in his small apartment, staring at the computer screen. The video was paused on Arthur Bennett's face. The tired eyes, the old coat, the quiet smile. Ethan had seen thousands of people in his life, but there was something different about Arthur. Most people, after being embarrassed in front of strangers, would become angry. They would complain. They would demand an apology. But Arthur had walked away peacefully, and then he gave his last piece of food to a hungry animal. Ethan couldn't forget that moment. He opened his laptop and started searching. Arthur Bennett. At first, he found nothing. Then he added another word. Teacher. A photograph appeared. Ethan froze. It was the same man, but years younger, standing in front of a classroom full of students. The caption read, Arthur Bennett, a teacher who changed thousands of lives. Ethan leaned closer to the screen. This can't be the same person. But it was. 40 years earlier, Arthur Bennett was known as one of the most dedicated teachers in the city. He wasn't the richest teacher. He didn't own expensive things. But he had something much more valuable. He cared. Every morning, Arthur arrived at school before sunrise. He prepared lessons. He cleaned the classroom when needed. He stayed late to help students who struggled. To Arthur, teaching was never just a job. It was a responsibility. One of his former students once said, Mr. Bennett didn't just teach us subjects. He taught us that we mattered. Ethan continued watching old interviews. One woman explained how Arthur had changed her life. When I was young, I was ready to quit school. I thought I wasn't smart enough. But Mr. Bennett stayed after class every day and helped me. He told me, your situation does not decide your future. Today, I am a successful doctor because he believed in me. Another former student shared his story. I grew up in a poor family. One day, I came to school without a proper uniform. I was embarrassed and wanted to leave. But Mr. Bennett quietly gave me a new uniform. He never told anyone. He didn't want praise. He just wanted me to stay in school. Ethan sat silently. The man who had been treated like he was invisible had spent his entire life making others feel seen. But there was more. Ethan discovered that Arthur's own life had not been easy. After retiring from teaching, Arthur's wife, Margaret, became seriously ill. For years, Arthur cared for her. He spent his savings on medical treatments. He sold his house. He gave up almost everything he owned. But he never complained. When people asked him how he stayed strong, he always answered, someone else's kindness helped me during my difficult days. So, I will continue passing it forward. After Margaret passed away, Arthur became even quieter. His only son, Daniel, had moved to another country years earlier. At first, they spoke often, but slowly, life became busy. The calls became fewer, and eventually, the silence became normal. Arthur missed him, but he never spoke badly about him. He has his own journey. Arthur would say, I only hope he is happy. Ethan closed his laptop. He looked back at the restaurant video. Suddenly, everything felt different. The old coat was not a sign of failure. It was a coat worn by someone who had sacrificed his entire life for others. The old cane was not a weakness. It was carried by someone who had walked through decades of challenges. And those few coins in his hand were carried by a man who once had everything but chose to give everything away. Ethan decided to share the story, not with anger, not to attack the restaurant, but to remind people of something important. He edited the video. The first scene showed Arthur being turned away. Then it showed him helping others, teaching children, helping neighbors, giving kindness without expecting anything. The final words appeared. Before you judge someone by what they have, discover what they have given. Ethan uploaded the video. Then he went to sleep. He expected maybe a few thousand views. But when he woke up the next morning, his phone was filled with notifications. Hundreds, then thousands, then millions. The video had spread everywhere. People around the world were sharing Arthur's story. Comments flooded in. Who is this amazing man? He deserves respect. I can't believe nobody helped him. This changed the way I see people. Meanwhile, Arthur had no idea what was happening. He woke up in his small room, made his simple tea, and walked outside. A neighbor saw him carrying groceries. "Mr. Bennett, let me help you." Arthur smiled. "I'm all right. Helping others keeps me young." He continued walking, not knowing that his name was now known across the world. But then something unexpected happened. A former student saw the viral video. She recognized Arthur immediately. She looked at the screen in disbelief. "No, it can't be." She searched through old photographs. And there he was, her favorite teacher, the man who had helped her when nobody else did. With tears in her eyes, she wrote a single message online. "I know this man, and the world needs to know his story." Within hours, more former students began appearing, and each person carried a story that would reveal just how much the internet had discovered Arthur Bennett. But Arthur Bennett had no idea. While millions of people were watching his story, he was sitting quietly in his small room, drinking a cup of tea and reading an old book. His life had always been simple. He never searched for attention. He never wanted applause. He never expected anyone to remember the things he had done. For Arthur, kindness was never a performance. It was simply the way he lived. But outside his small apartment building, something extraordinary was happening. Hundreds of people had gathered on the street. Neighbors, strangers, and people Arthur hadn't seen in decades. They were holding old photographs, school certificates, and handwritten letters. They were waiting for one person, Arthur Bennett. A knock came at his door. Arthur slowly walked over and opened it. The moment he stepped outside, he stopped. A crowd was standing in front of him. For a few seconds, Arthur looked confused. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "Is there something I can help you with?" A woman standing in front smiled through tears. "Mr. Bennett." Arthur looked carefully at her face. Then his eyes widened. "Emma." The woman nodded. "You remember me?" Arthur smiled. "Of course I do. You were the girl who always sat near the window." Emma laughed while wiping away tears. "You remembered. How could I forget?" Arthur replied. "You always carried a book and asked 100 questions." The crowd smiled. But then Emma became emotional. "Mr. Bennett, I want you to know something. That day, when everyone told me I wasn't good enough, you were the only person who believed in me. You stayed after school and helped me learn. You told me I could become anything." She looked around at the crowd. "Today, I am a doctor, and it's because of you." Arthur looked down. "I was only your teacher." Emma shook her head. "No, you were the person who gave me hope." Then another person stepped forward. A successful businessman. "Mr. Bennett, do you remember me?" Arthur smiled. "Michael." The man laughed. "You remember everyone." Arthur nodded. "I remember my students." Michael looked emotional. "I was ready to drop out of school. My family had no money. You bought my books secretly. You told me education was my way forward. Today, I run my own company, and I never forgot what you did." One by one, the stories continued. A firefighter, a nurse, a lawyer, a teacher, an engineer, 100 people, 1,000 memories. Every person had one thing in common. Arthur had helped them when they needed someone, and he never told anyone. At that moment, Ethan arrived. He watched from a distance. The same old man who had been rejected at a restaurant was now surrounded by people whose lives he had changed. Ethan walked closer. "Mr. Bennett." Arthur smiled. "Ethan, I heard you made quite a story about an old man." Ethan laughed. "I didn't make the story. You lived it." Then another car arrived. Everyone became silent. The restaurant manager, Richard Collins, stepped out. The same man who had asked Arthur to leave. But this time, he wasn't confident. He looked nervous. He walked toward Arthur. "I'm sorry." The crowd became quiet. Richard continued. "I judged you without knowing you. I saw your clothes. I saw your situation. But I never tried to see your heart. I was wrong." Arthur looked at him. For a moment, nobody knew what he would say. Then Arthur smiled. "I forgive you." Richard looked surprised. After everything, Arthur nodded. Everyone deserves a chance to become better. Those simple words affected everyone. A week later, something beautiful happened. The same restaurant that once closed its door on Arthur opened its doors for him. But this time, the entire city was there. The restaurant owner stood on stage. We thought success was measured by expensive food and luxury. But Arthur Bennett taught us something different. Success is measured by the lives we improve. The owner announced a new project. The restaurant would provide free meals every week for elderly people and families struggling financially. And Arthur would help organize it. The crowd applauded. Arthur looked uncomfortable with all the attention. "I don't deserve this." A young child in the audience shouted. "Yes, you do." Everyone laughed. Months passed. The video continued inspiring people around the world. People started small acts of kindness. Someone paid for a stranger's groceries. Someone visited lonely elderly neighbors. Students started helping classmates. The world didn't change because of a viral video. It changed because people remembered something they had forgotten. Everyone has a story. One evening, Ethan visited Arthur at the same park where they first met. Arthur was sitting beneath the old oak tree, feeding birds. Ethan sat beside him. "Do you ever think about that night?" Arthur smiled. "The restaurant?" "Yes." Arthur looked at the sunset. "I was sad that night, but I learned something." "What?" Arthur looked at him. "Sometimes people close a door because they don't know who is standing outside. But kindness has a way of opening new ones." Ethan smiled. "Do you know millions of people know your name now?" Arthur laughed. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that maybe someone looked at another person differently today." Years later, Arthur Bennett passed away peacefully, but his story remained alive. The park bench where he used to sit became a place where people came to remember him. A small message was placed there. Never judge a person by what you see. You may be standing in front of someone who has spent their entire life helping others. The old man who was once ignored, the old man who was once asked to leave, became the person who reminded the world about compassion. Because sometimes, the quietest people carry the loudest stories. A small act of kindness can change a life. Never underestimate the power of being kind. Subscribe to Kindness Tales for more inspiring stories. 3 years had passed since the night Arthur Bennett stood outside that restaurant door in the rain. A night that started with rejection had become a moment that changed thousands of lives. But the most surprising thing was not that Arthur became famous. The surprising thing was that Arthur never changed. Even after newspapers wrote about him, even after television channels invited him, even after millions of people knew his name, he still woke up early every morning. He still wore the same old brown coat. He still walked through the same streets. And he still looked for people who needed kindness. Because Arthur never believed he was special. He believed kindness was something everyone could give. One morning, Ethan visited Arthur with a question. "Mr. Bennett, can I ask you something?" Arthur smiled. "Of course. After everything that happened, after the whole world learned your story, do you ever wonder why that night happened?" Arthur looked out the window. For a moment, he was silent. Then he smiled. "Yes, I do. At first, I wondered why someone would judge me without knowing me. But later, I realized something." "What?" Arthur looked at Ethan. "Maybe that moment happened because someone else needed to learn a lesson." Ethan nodded. "The manager?" "Not only him." Arthur replied. "All of us." Richard Collins, the restaurant manager, was never the same after that night. The experience changed him completely. Before, he believed people were defined by their appearance, by their clothes, by their money. But Arthur showed him a different way to see the world. Richard started visiting elderly homes. He created programs to help struggling families. And every year, on the anniversary of that rainy night, he invited people who felt forgotten to dinner. Not because he wanted attention, but because he remembered the man he almost ignored. One evening, Richard visited Arthur. He brought an old wooden box. "I wanted to give you something." Arthur opened it. Inside was a collection of letters. Hundreds of them. Letters from people around the world. People who had watched the video. People who said Arthur's story changed them. One letter was from a young boy. It said, "Dear Mr. Bennett, I used to laugh at people who looked different from me. But after hearing your story, I started helping others. Thank you for teaching me something even my school couldn't teach." Arthur read the letter carefully. His eyes became emotional. This is the greatest gift. Years continued to pass. Arthur became older. His steps became slower, but his kindness became stronger. Every Sunday, people gathered in the park where Arthur used to sit. They called it The kindness hour. People brought food. Children read books to elderly visitors. Neighbors helped each other, and everyone remembered the lesson Arthur taught them. One day, a young reporter asked Arthur, "Mr. Bennett, what do you want people to remember about you?" Many expected him to talk about his achievements, his awards, his thousands of students, his viral story. But Arthur simply smiled. "I don't want people to remember me." The reporter looked surprised. "Then what should they remember?" Arthur answered, "I want them to remember that every person they meet is fighting a battle they cannot see. Before judging someone, choose kindness." That answer became one of the most shared messages from his story, because people finally understood something. The old man outside the restaurant was never asking for food. He was showing people something they had forgotten: humanity. Many years later, Ethan created a final documentary about Arthur's life. The last scene showed Arthur sitting beneath the old oak tree, the same place where Ethan first recorded him. The camera slowly moved closer. Arthur smiled. "People often ask me when my life changed, but I think the better question is, when did I start changing the lives of others? Because every small kindness matters. A smile, a helping hand, a few kind words. You never know how much someone needs it." The documentary ended with a simple message. The world does not become better because of famous people. It becomes better because ordinary people choose kindness every day. The video was watched by millions. But this time, people didn't just watch. They acted. They helped. They cared. They looked at strangers differently. And somewhere in that same city, a young man once walked past an elderly person sitting alone. He stopped. He remembered Arthur's story. And instead of walking away, he asked, "Are you okay? Can I help you?" The elderly person smiled. And that one small moment created another story. A story that started because one old man was thrown out of a restaurant, but ended because millions of hearts opened. The greatest legacy is not what we leave behind. It's the kindness we leave inside others. In a story. If this story touched your heart, share kindness with someone today and subscribe to Kindness Tales for more emotional stories.